thank you for inviting me here to make sense of big data. This is a beautiful venue, and unfortunately, after Jessica's fascinating talk, I'm going to be tonight's party pooper, and I guess this is what we lawyers do. Now, I'll be talking about the regulatory challenges in protecting students' rights while applying big data technologies. Now, educators have always used data to inform instruction and to improve the learning process. So before talking about regulation, I would like to start with breaking down what are the key implications of big data education. First of all, significantly quantity of student data is being processed throughout the educational process. Now, teachers and students' interaction with a wide range of digital application generates a vast amount of data. The available data can provide us information about students' demographics, his psychological condition, his financial status, his attendance records, grades, of course, but it can also provide us information about how students learn, what are his weaknesses, his preferences, his motivations, what does he know, what he doesn't know. And now, for our discussion, please allow me to refer to all of these types of data as student data. Let's call it like that. So student data can be personally identifiable information. It can also come in a de-identifying form, and it can also be in an aggregated manner. Student data can be extracted from various different kinds of data sources. This may be longitudinal databases, standardized tests, learning management systems, and apps, and so on. Let's look, for example, at this application. It's called Class Dojo. This popular cartoonic behavior app lets a teacher award point or subtract point based on a student's conduct in classroom. Now, the app immediately sends a notice to the child's parents if he had signed up for the service. So now, I'll just show you what it can do. Well, these are the options that you can press as a teacher. Now, apart from being quite annoying from a parent's point of view, this application collects a lot of sensitive data about children, about students. And currently, schools are generally incapable of independently processed and used the vast amount of available data. Therefore, they've come under an increased pressure to turn to the private sector for the provision of big data techniques. Educational technology companies such as Pearson and such as McGraw-Hill now possess the capacity to collect, to mine, to process, to analyze, and even make educational decisions based on significant amount of student data. And the third implication is that student data is being processed by algorithm-based softwares. Ostensibly, these softwares can afford technology-enhanced pedagogical application, such as personalized learning, adaptive learning, and performance prediction. Newton, for example, it uses sophisticated algorithms to provide students with learning activity recommendation based on what the students know, what he doesn't know, what he's struggling with, and what he's ready for. Now, to sum up this point, we see that as a result of the introduction of big data into education, larger portions of schools' core functions, such as teaching, assessing, disciplining, are being outsourced to for-profit organizations. Now, this kind of transition, it brings about a shift in power, and I didn't randomly select these colors, and it brings a shift in power from schools, who were traditionally entrusted with the capacity to educate, to the hands of for-profit organizations. And I can presume that as education becomes more web-based and more data-driven, we can expect the role of vendors in schools' everyday operation to expand. Now, using technologies or services offered by vendors is certainly not new to the educational domain. Nonetheless, the combination between more technology and the reliance on vendors, on for-profit organizations, has nourished wide-ranging concerns in the US regarding the use of student data. Let us go back to 2011. In Bloom, it's a non-profit corporation funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and along with the Carnegie Corporation of New York. It offered school districts an advanced data repository that can collect information from districts' many databases. The information could be stored in the cloud, and schools would have easy access to it. InBloom also promised to help with personalized learning by funneling student data into a software dashboard. By 2013, every school in the state of New York was using InBloom's data repository, sharing personal information of 2.7 million students. Now, at one point, by the way, InBloom admitted that it could collect more student data than Google does. And that's a lot. But for some worried parents, InBloom's access to so much data and information about students became just too fearsome. So, following an intensive negative campaign led by parents and privacy advocates, in April 2014, InBloom completely shut down its operation. This is after an investment of over $100 million. And just to clarify, there was no evidence of InBloom misusing in any manner the information that it collected. And in response to Americans' persistent concerns over the use of student data, state legislature began passing laws to fill the gap in the outdated federal laws that addressed the use of student data. In fact, by October 2015, 47 US states introduced 186 bills that addressed the use of student data. Of these bills, 28 in 15 states were enacted into law. There are also several federal laws that are currently pending. So the question is, what is it exactly that overnight made Americans so suspicious of this private sector's access to student data? And another question is, why should Europeans be interested in the American student data uproar, as I call it? So now, the prime concerns were mainly and obviously about privacy. Critics were afraid of the disclosure of sensitive information about children, such as learning disabilities, disciplinary problems, family trauma. Of particular concern was the likelihood that vendors will sell or otherwise monetize student data through building advertising profiles or marketing. This concern turned out to be well placed. In 2014, for example, Google admitted that it was mining student data from its Google Apps for Education, which are offered free to schools for the purposes of targeting advertisements. But the demise of InBloom triggered an extremely polarized debate over the surrounding student privacy. What is student privacy? Nevertheless, with time, this debate went way beyond privacy in the sense of appropriate flow of information. Indeed, much of the debate about student privacy was not about privacy at all. And the term student privacy just became a rallying cry related to any issue that involves the use of student data in K-12 education. critics have expressed their concerns that the use of student data by third party will result in a threat to students' autonomy. They claim that constant monitoring of students' online activity may overly limit their creativity and their free speech by creating the so-called surveillance effect. And when thinking of these claims from an educational perspective, we can argue that constant data collection can harm the development of students' intellectual autonomy, as Jean Piaget would describe it, and eventually it will hinder the educational process. And if we wish to translate Piaget's theory into legal terms, I believe that we can use Neil Richard's legal concept of what is called intellectual privacy. This is a different way to look at privacy. So intellectual privacy means, and I quote, the ability, gap, to develop ideas and beliefs away from the unwanted gaze or interference of others, constantly monitoring students' action, reading and communication may just as well breach their intellectual privacy as Richard defines it. Now, this is a different way of looking at the potential risk of big data to student privacy. Big data in education has also been perceived as a threat to educational equity and opportunity. A White House report from 2014 titled Big Data Seizing Opportunities, Preserving Values raised the possibility of big data leading to potential discriminatory outcomes for disadvantaged groups. Let's see how it works. Let's look at, for example, at the services offered by the National Research Center for Colleges and Universities Admission. Now, this center, it's a private company, by the way, it offers a model to predict which high school students are most likely to enroll to a certain college. Now, this wonderful ability to identify prospective students helped many colleges to target students that might never have thought about enrolling or going to college. But at the same time, the same ability raises the risk that some colleges with worrisome bottom lines will pursue only certain kinds of students. For example, students that can pay their way without scholarship on the expense of others who Even more so, critics have been concerned that continuous student data mining coupled with data-driven decision-making will exacerbate biases and create new forms of discrimination. Now, grounding decision-making on objective information retrieved by algorithms may appear neutral and irrefutably objective and scientific, of course. But however, the assumptions that are built into the technology, they reflect particular norms and particular values about what educational equity means. Therefore, the algorithm itself may rely on biased data that reflects social inequalities, and therefore it may reinforce present structural inequalities. Another equity-related problem with grounding decision-making on big data and algorithms lies in the fact that correlation is not causation. Therefore, the software or the algorithm may find a high correlation between, let's say, attendance and end-of-the-year scores. And it makes sense, of course. But from a normative point of view, will we feel comfortable making, let's say, an ability grouping decision based on this correlation, knowing that children from underserved communities are relatively much more likely to be absent? One more prominent concern has to do with big data prematurely and permanently labeling students as underperformers. For instance, the identification of students as at-risk students might not allow them to remove any harmful information or harmful record about their failures. And so, even if a student significantly improved in the future, how do we know that prior data will not forestall future opportunities? So after this long overview, we can now talk about regulation. So the American case elucidates that the protection of students' rights shouldn't focus only on the uses of data outside of school, but inside it as well, taking into account the various potential risks. Now, please be reminded that edtech companies are not bounded by constitutional law, and they are not publicly accountable like elected officers are. And this makes the process much more complicated. On the other hand, increased regulation may limit the ability to develop important educational solutions and important services and products. It may also make vendors worry to invest and to use big data in schools. So a narrow focus on risks and on safety may just as well undermine students' ability to access the wonderful benefits of big data. Therefore, we need a regulatory approach that can foster students' rights while maximizing access to innovative services. And to some extent, this needs to balance, the need to balance between data protection and data-driven innovation. It exists in many other fields, such as health, insurance, banking, transportation, governance, border control, e-commerce, etc. But all the same, K-12 education does have some distinguishing characters or distinguishing characteristics that cannot be ignored when designing legal and regulatory rules. This is, of course, just a partial list of those unique characters that K-12 education has. And another challenge to regulating big data in education lies in the fact that often the law is not enough. We know that human rights are a legal concept, and we are used to thinking of them in legal terms. But if we care about student rights, we must protect them beyond the legal system, as part of the culture and the norms of contemporary data-infused educational landscape, including pedagogical norms, technological designs, and professional ethics. Some of these regulatory questions are actually questions of educational policy. When and where and for which purposes do we need big data? What are the boundaries between private and public in data-driven education? Who calls the shots? It is the algorithm? Is it the teacher? Now, educational achievements are already being assessed based on measurable data. Do we want more of this kind of assessment? These are all questions that should be answered by educators, not by lawyers. Now, as opposed to the American piecemeal approach of regulating the use of personal data, where legislation is sector-based, the European Union applies a comprehensive legal approach. Now, these challenges that I've described of regulating big data in education should make us examine whether the principle of the recently enacted General Data Protection Regulation are appropriate and effective in this regard. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time. We don't have enough time to elaborate on each and every principle. So please allow me to discuss one major principle just to illustrate this kind of analysis. Informed consent. Informed consent is a key ground for lawfulness of processing personal data. Now, before big data, parents could roughly gauge the expected uses of their children's personal data. But today, the ability to make extensive secondary uses, often unexpected uses, of student data makes it just simply too complicated for the average parent to make fine-grained decisions or choices for every new situation. Therefore, parents could end up unintentionally exclude their children from services that are necessary for their education just because they're unable or unwilling to parse out complex data policy statements. Now, this is perhaps one of the reasons why protecting students' rights should be a regulatory and not a contractual matter. However, opting out is also hardly a feasible alternative in the educational context. Most parents do not have the privilege of changing their children's school just based on their privacy policy. And since schools ultimately have the power to make choices and decisions that can affect a child's life chances and life course, there is a risk that parents will feel compelled to accept the terms of use. This is only one of the principles that I talked about, but each one can be discussed in this regard. But student privacy doesn't have to be a binary concept, which is either or, on or off. Parents should be given the option of choosing which data they agree to share and for which purposes. I believe that if EdTech companies claim that they can personalize learning, no doubt that they can also personalize privacy policy or data use policy. Now, it could be that big data will revolutionize education as we know it, and maybe a shift in power from schools to vendors is inevitable to some degree. But it would be a mistake to run forward on computing and statistics without making sure that students' rights are not jeopardized and are not compromised in pursuit of conflicting governmental and contractual interests. And the General Data Protection Regulation, the European, indicates a possible paradigm shift in approaching privacy and data protection, but still it does not address the entire pitfalls of big data in education. So I would suggest to start with identifying and evaluating the potential risk. What are the potential risks? And just then to carefully design the appropriate regulation that will safeguard students' rights without creating any roadblocks for innovations. I'm on time, huh? Okay, thank you very much.